The alien stepped off the shuttle and immediately felt the strange pull of gravity, the subtle vibration of the planet beneath her feet making her antennas twitch involuntarily. Earth was quaint. Surprisingly messy, bustling with an uncoordinated chaos that made her circuits hum in equal parts fascination and horror. She adjusted her human disguise, a somewhat tight cardigan and slacks that were supposed to make her blend in, though the long, subtly iridescent fingers betraying her heritage slipped out at odd angles whenever she moved. Her mission was simple: study human courtship rituals. Observe, record, and under no circumstances touch a human. Protocol could not be broken. Ever. Despite her initial confidence, the first few steps into the bustling human city brought immediate doubts. Pedestrians collided into her with alarming frequency. Mobile devices seemed to possess a magnetic attraction to elbows and fingertips, and the incessant chatter and laughter created a background noise she found almost overwhelming. She took a cautious step toward a small cafe that her reconnaissance had designated as a primary observation site. Its warm light spilled onto the pavement like an invitation she couldn't quite resist. She entered, attempting to mimic human grace. She nearly failed within seconds, tripping over the uneven tile and sending a coffee cup wobbling dangerously close to the edge of the counter. The barista, a tall human with a smile that seemed effortlessly charming, caught it midair, giving her an approving nod that made her internal protocols flare. Focus. Do not touch humans. Do not, under any circumstances, engage in physical contact. Her first scan of the cafe confirmed what her sensors already suspected. Humans thrived on constant incidental contact. Arms brushed, shoulders bumped, coffee cups knocked, laughter exploded around minor collisions. She adjusted her posture, trying to minimize the chance of touching anyone. Easier said than done. She reached for a latte with a trembling hand, only to have her long fingers graze the arm of a passerby, eliciting a surprised yelp. She recoiled in horror, but the human interpreted it as a flirtatious gesture, sending her a shy smile before returning to their seat. Protocol violation, narrowly avoided, but embarrassment index skyrocketed. Her attention, however, was immediately snagged by the barista. Everything about this human seemed designed to defy her restraint. The fluidity of the gestures, the casual flick of hair from the forehead, the playful wink exchanged with a regular customer, all of it was ineffably magnetic. She forced herself to remain at the end of the counter, observing like a detached scientist, taking mental notes on the pattern of smiles, laughter, and subtle physicality. But observation quickly turned into fascination. Her sensors, which were finely tuned to detect social cues, started producing an alarmingly high reading whenever the barista moved even slightly closer to her line of sight. Determined to follow protocol, she attempted to maintain a calculated distance, slipping behind tables, crouching near chairs, and even ducking behind a coat rack once to avoid accidental proximity. But humans were unpredictable. A sudden sneeze, an accidental stumble by a nearby patron, and the chaos that followed nearly caused her to make the first real contact. She flailed awkwardly, sending her notebook flying, which landed in the barista's hands. "Oh!" the human exclaimed, flashing a grin that made her circuits short-circuit slightly. She snatched the notebook back, mumbling something about calibration errors and retreating a step too quickly, causing her heel to clip a chair. The alien's attempts to blend in were further compromised by the subtle quirks of human interaction. A customer approached, shaking hands with the barista as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. The alien froze. Her protocols screamed at her, no touching humans, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the contact. Her mind raced with confusion, fascination, and a growing internal debate about whether these gestures were part of courtship, bonding, or some bizarre, instinctual ritual. The tension reached a comedic peak when she attempted to observe the barista while simultaneously reaching for a sugar packet. Her hand collided with another customer's shoulder. In a split second, a sneeze erupted from her, sending her lurching forward into an unintended embrace. The customer's eyes widened, the barista blinked in surprise, and she stiffened as her internal warning system screamed protocol violation. The customer, however, interpreted it as a friendly hug and responded with a hearty laugh, patting her on the back. The alien's circuits almost melted. Recovering as best she could, she retreated to a corner booth, attempting to regain composure. She noted with a mixture of horror and curiosity that every human in the cafe now seemed to interpret her every action as some kind of courtship signal. Her accidental touches, her startled jumps, her sneeze-induced hug, all were catalogued in her observational matrix as possible ritual behaviors. She scribbled notes, furiously, trying to maintain a veneer of detachment, while internally counting down the nanoseconds until her heart rate returned to normal. Despite her strict adherence to rules, her attention never wavered from the barista. Every tilt of the head, every casual laugh, and every well-timed gesture sent sparks of unmanageable fascination through her systems. She knew that protocol forbade touching, but the sheer magnetic pull of the human presence was overwhelming. Her curiosity was no longer purely scientific. It had become a personal obsession, a force she could neither quantify nor ignore. By the time the morning rush ended, the alien was exhausted, frazzled, and yet inexplicably exhilarated. She had survived multiple accidental touches, near violations, and a cascade of confusing human reactions that only increased her interest. Protocol remained intact, technically, but she realized with a mixture of dread and delight that resisting the allure of this human would be her most difficult challenge yet. Every fiber of her being wanted to study, touch, and understand, but every fiber of her training screamed restraint. And so she sat, notebook in hand, observing the barista from a careful distance, knowing that her mission was just beginning, and that the universe of human chaos had barely begun to unfold before her. Her final thought before retreating to analyze her notes: humans were far more unpredictable than any alien civilization she had studied. And perhaps, in her line of work, unpredictability was irresistibly enticing. The alien spent the next day pacing herself, determined to master the delicate balance of observing humans without violating protocol. She had devised a series of strategies, each more elaborate than the last, intended to prevent accidental touches. She stationed herself at a corner table with a small barrier of coffee cups and napkins, imagining a perfect invisible force field between herself and the chaotic world around her. She reminded herself repeatedly that the mission depended on her self-control, yet every time the barista appeared, the carefully constructed mental walls started to crumble. Humans, as she noted with a mix of fascination and exasperation, seemed to operate on a principle of random motion, moving unpredictably, often without regard for spatial awareness. A customer's elbow would veer into her side while laughing at a joke, a chair would be nudged into her knees, and her notebook would occasionally slip toward another patron, prompting a flurry of apologies and embarrassed shuffles. Each minor contact sent her stress indicators spiking, yet the humans interpreted it as nothing more than endearing clumsiness. One man even winked at her after she recoiled from his accidental brush, and she had to suppress a shudder of confusion, noting that humans' interpretation of physical gestures was entirely illogical. Her fascination with the barista, however, remained an entirely different, more dangerous level. Every time the human leaned over the counter to retrieve a coffee cup or exchanged a smile with another patron, her sensors recorded a spike in attraction levels that defied rational explanation. She tried observing from a distance, crouching behind tables or pretending to be absorbed in her notebook, but the barista's energy was magnetic, drawing her like a moth to a flame. A spilled drop of espresso near her feet caused her to step back, only to brush a passing human's arm again, prompting an awkwardly long handshake in response. She froze, internally counting this as the second or third near-protocol violation of the morning. Her attempts at indirect observation soon devolved into a comical series of near misses. She tried using a book as a shield while leaning over a table to read the barista's gestures, only for a gust of wind from the cafe door to knock the book into her lap, sending her sprawling backward. The crash sent a cup of latte flying across the room. It landed precariously close to a human, and instinctively she lunged to stop it, resulting in her shoulder bumping against the unsuspecting customer. The human blinked, laughed nervously, and patted her shoulder as though congratulating her for some heroic act. She froze, internally screaming protocol violation, yet outwardly she could only stiffly nod in acknowledgement. Her internal conflict reached new levels of absurdity during a particularly busy afternoon rush. A sneeze, long suppressed, finally escaped with explosive force, propelling her arms forward in an instinctive motion of protection. Unfortunately, her forward lunge landed her directly in the path of the barista, who caught her by surprise. The collision sent both of them stumbling slightly, and she realized, with horror, that she had accidentally wrapped herself around the human in what could only be described as an unintended hug. The barista blinked at her, startled, then laughed, interpreting the embrace as a friendly, or perhaps flirtatious, gesture. She extricated herself as quickly as possible, cheeks flushing internally with a mix of shame and confusion. Even her attempts to retreat to a corner for solitary observation were thwarted. Patrons moved unpredictably, trays of drinks shifted, and small items cascaded onto the floor. Each time she bent down to pick up a fallen pen or notebook, she brushed against another human. Each contact elicited a response, sometimes a chuckle, sometimes a playful nudge, that humans seemed to interpret as social bonding, while she internally recalibrated the incident as a serious protocol breach. Her notebook was filled with frantic, almost illegible notes about the frequency and types of accidental contact, her growing obsession with the barista, and a continuous internal monologue reminding herself to resist touching. As the day wore on, she found herself increasingly unable to maintain her carefully constructed barriers. Every human movement seemed amplified in her perception, a chaotic ballet that constantly challenged her restraint. She observed the barista arranging cups, their fingers moving fluidly, gesturing naturally, and her circuits twitched with an almost physical response. The human laughed at a joke from a regular customer, and the way their shoulders relaxed, the slight tilt of their head, sent a shockwave of attraction through her sensors. She flailed internally, trying to rationalize her reaction as purely observational, but every instinct screamed otherwise. Her final attempt to remain composed involved using a stack of menus as a makeshift shield, while she scribbled notes on human courtship patterns. A young customer darted past, colliding into the menus and sending the top ones flying. Instinctively, she lunged to catch them, only to collide again with the barista's side. Both froze, eyes meeting in a silent, chaotic acknowledgement of the collision. The human's grin suggested amusement rather than offense, and her internal systems registered a spike in attraction metrics that was entirely unhelpful. She quickly straightened, muttering excuses under her breath, and attempted to restore a semblance of composure. By the end of the day, the alien was exhausted, her attempts at strict adherence to protocol utterly failing in the face of human unpredictability and charm. Every sneeze, every misstep, every accidental brush had been interpreted as social engagement or flirtation. She reviewed her notes, realizing that her observational task was becoming increasingly personal. The human's casual disregard for space and her involuntary fascination with the barista had combined to create a chaotic environment where she was no longer just an observer. She was a participant, whether she liked it or not. Despite the constant failures and escalating internal panic, a small part of her circuits, perhaps a vestige of curiosity or something stranger, was exhilarated. Humans were messy, illogical, and delightfully unpredictable, and her attraction to this particular human was growing in a way that threatened every protocol she had ever been trained to follow. She left the cafe that evening, notebook clutched tightly, mind spinning with observations and scenarios, already anticipating the next round of chaotic encounters. She understood one immutable truth: following protocol while interacting with humans was going to be far more difficult than any training had ever prepared her for, and resisting her fascination with the barista was going to be an adventure in absurdity, awkwardness, and comedic misfortune unlike anything she had ever experienced. The alien returned the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose, though her circuits hummed with a combination of anxiety and excitement. She had spent the night analyzing her notes, calculating probabilities, and devising new strategies to avoid physical contact. Despite her best efforts, the barista had imprinted themselves on her neural pathways in ways she could neither quantify nor suppress. Every gesture, every laugh, every casual tilt of the head had lodged itself firmly in her observational matrix, prompting a persistent internal debate between duty and fascination. From the moment she entered the cafe, the human chaos unfolded like a perfectly unscripted performance. Patrons jostled and laughed, trays clattered, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. The alien positioned herself strategically behind a stack of menus, intending to observe from a safe distance. Yet even in her careful hiding, she could not escape the gravitational pull of the barista's presence. Each movement the human made, reaching for a cup, adjusting a sleeve, serving a customer with a smile, triggered a cascade of reactions in her sensors. Her long fingers twitched with an almost uncontrollable desire to reach out, to touch, to connect. Determined to remain compliant, she experimented with indirect observation. She scribbled notes while pretending to read the cafe's menu, crouched behind chairs, and even attempted to monitor human interactions through reflective surfaces. But fate, or perhaps the universe, had other plans. A sudden sneeze, triggered by an unanticipated dust particle, sent her arms flailing forward, and she collided with a passing patron. The human stumbled, and in a comically exaggerated attempt to steady them, she ended up brushing against the barista's arm. The human interpreted the contact as playful, sending a broad grin her way, while her internal alarm system screamed protocol violation. She tried to rationalize these mishaps scientifically. Perhaps humans misinterpreted physical cues as flirtation because their social logic was fundamentally different from any other species she had studied. She began cataloging every accidental touch, every unintended brush, as a cultural variable, in her ongoing experiment. Her observations were meticulous. The angle of accidental contact, the duration of human reactions, the intensity of smiles, the frequency of laughter, all became data points in her spiraling study of human courtship behavior. The barista, blissfully unaware of the alien's internal turmoil, continued their work with an effortless charm that only exacerbated her predicament. A spilled coffee on the counter required a quick, reflexive movement on her part to prevent a mess, and her hand brushed against the barista's wrist. A gasp escaped her internal systems, but outwardly she froze, trying to look like nothing had happened. The barista, interpreting the motion as a friendly gesture, chuckled and patted her hand lightly, sending a shockwave of confusion and delight through her circuits. Every accidental touch seemed to escalate the human's interest, further destabilizing her attempt to remain professional. Determined to regain composure, she retreated to a distant table, attempting to analyze her observations without further incident. She noted the absurdity of human reactions. Even the slightest incidental contact was often met with a playful comment, a smile, or a laugh. She realized that adhering strictly to protocol in such an environment was virtually impossible, especially when her fascination with a specific individual clouded every rational calculation. She scribbled frantic notes, half scientific, half emotional, recording her growing attachment to the barista and the unpredictable consequences of physical proximity. The chaos intensified as lunchtime approached. Patrons crowded the cafe, chairs scraped across the floor, and trays teetered perilously. She attempted to navigate the space carefully, using menus and coffee cups as shields. Inevitably, she stumbled into a human, who interpreted her awkward flailing as a playful attempt at social interaction. In the process, she collided with the barista again, this time with more force, sending a tray of pastries tumbling. The barista caught one midair and laughed, clearly amused, while she froze, mortified by her continued protocol breaches. Her internal systems calculated multiple probabilities of punitive action by her superiors, yet the allure of the human remained irresistible. Even her attempts at observation were fraught with comedic mishaps. She leaned over to scribble notes, while watching a group of humans interact, only to misjudge the distance and bump the barista's shoulder. A startled laugh escaped the human, which she misinterpreted as a complex courtship signal. She froze, scribbling furiously while simultaneously trying to disentangle herself from the inadvertent contact. Each misstep, each accidental brush, and each misread cue compounded her internal dilemma: follow protocol or indulge the irresistible chaos of human unpredictability. By mid-afternoon, she realized her experiment had transformed. It was no longer a detached study of human courtship rituals but a personal ordeal in restraint, fascination, and comedic disaster. The barista's every action drew her in like a gravitational force, and her attempts to maintain distance only resulted in more accidental touches, each interpreted by humans as flirtation. She documented every incident meticulously, noting the absurdity, the miscommunication, and the unintended hilarity that arose from her failed restraint. The culmination of the day arrived when a particularly busy moment forced her to navigate through a crowded area. She attempted to push past a cluster of patrons without touching anyone, only for a sudden sneeze to launch her forward, wrapping her unintentionally around the barista in a clumsy embrace. The human, far from offended, laughed heartily, patting her on the back and teasing her playfully. Her internal systems nearly overloaded, registering maximum protocol breach, highest fascination, and extreme embarrassment simultaneously. Retreating to a corner booth, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Despite the repeated failures, the mishaps, and the escalating chaos, she recognized a strange exhilaration in the unpredictability of humans. Each accidental touch, each misinterpreted gesture, each slapstick collision had only deepened her fascination. The mission remained paramount, yet the line between observer and participant had blurred beyond recognition. She scribbled the final notes of the day, acknowledging that humans were chaotic, hilarious, and irresistibly magnetic, and that resisting the pull of the barista was becoming an increasingly impossible task. As she left the cafe, notebook clutched tightly, she realized the absurd truth: no matter how meticulously she planned, humans, and one particular barista, were a delightful, uncontrollable force that she could not ignore. Each encounter promised more comedy, more accidental intimacy, and a growing tension between duty and irresistible attraction that she knew would define the days to come. Her mission was no longer simply observation, it was survival amidst a whirlwind of laughter, chaos, and the inexplicable charm of humanity. The following day began with the alien arriving at the cafe with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, her circuits buzzing with the memory of yesterday's disasters. She had calculated every possible scenario, prepared mental contingencies for every unexpected movement, and yet she knew, deep down, that humans were unpredictable, and the barista in particular was a living variable she could not control. Even the idea of attempting to follow protocol without contact seemed almost laughable now, given her track record. Still, she was determined to try, though the moment she stepped inside, the familiar chaos greeted her like an old, mischievous friend. The barista greeted her with a casual wave, oblivious to the internal panic rising within her. Every movement of their hands, every subtle tilt of the head, and every playful interaction with other patrons caused her systems to spike with fascination. She tried to maintain a safe distance, slipping behind tables and balancing her notebook like a shield, but humans crowded unpredictably. A customer's elbow jostled her, sending her notebook sliding into the barista's counter. The human picked it up, glanced at her with a teasing smile, and handed it back, their fingers brushing hers in the process. She froze, internally calculating the catastrophic protocol violation she had just committed, while externally attempting to maintain composure. Determined to regain control, she decided to observe the barista indirectly. She crouched near a tray of pastries, taking careful notes on human gestures and interactions. Yet, even this strategy proved futile. A spilled cup of espresso triggered an instinctive lunge on her part to prevent disaster. Her hands collided with the barista's shoulder as she stumbled, sending a cascade of coffee cups clattering. Patrons laughed, thinking it was a playful mishap, while she scrambled to apologize, internally cringing at the repeated failures of restraint. Her circuits buzzed with conflicting instructions: adhere to protocol, maintain observational integrity, and suppress attraction, all simultaneously impossible. The situation escalated further during a mid-afternoon rush. Patrons crowded the cafe, trays teetered, and the barista moved with effortless efficiency. The alien attempted to navigate the chaos without touching anyone, but the combination of her long limbs and human unpredictability ensured near-constant contact. She accidentally brushed a human's arm while reaching for a pen, tripped over a chair leg, and in the process collided with the barista, sending a tray of pastries tumbling. The human caught one mid-air, laughing heartily, while she froze, acutely aware that her every move was being misinterpreted as charm or flirtation. Her fascination had reached a tipping point. She realized that no amount of careful planning could prevent accidental contact around this human. Each collision, each slip, each awkward gesture seemed to increase the barista's amusement rather than provoke annoyance. She attempted to focus on field notes, jotting down patterns of behavior, but her handwriting became increasingly erratic as she tried to hide the blush creeping into her human disguise. Observing humans was no longer a purely scientific endeavor. It was intensely personal, and every interaction brought a new layer of internal chaos. In a particularly crowded moment, a minor sneeze escalated into a full-blown slapstick disaster. The alien lunged instinctively to protect a tumbling cup of coffee, but momentum carried her into the barista, wrapping her arms around the human in a clumsy, accidental embrace. Patrons froze momentarily, then erupted into laughter, interpreting the collision as playful flirtation. The barista, far from offended, patted her back with an amused smile, their reactions simultaneously mortifying and exhilarating her. She disentangled herself as quickly as possible, internally screaming protocol violation while externally attempting to appear graceful. Despite the chaos, a strange exhilaration surged through her circuits. Humans were unpredictable, amusing, and absurdly charming, and the barista embodied all of these qualities in a way that defied her logic. Each accidental touch, each misinterpreted gesture, and each slapstick mishap highlighted the impossible challenge of following protocol in an environment ruled by human whimsy. Her fascination, once controlled and observational, had transformed into an uncontainable mix of attraction, confusion, and hilarity. By late afternoon, she found herself retreating to a corner booth, exhausted but exhilarated. Every encounter had been an experiment in chaotic human behavior, and yet every accidental contact had also deepened her interest in the barista. Her notebook was filled with a mixture of precise observations, personal reflections, and frantic notes about the absurdity of humans. She realized that attempting to adhere to protocol while interacting with humans was an exercise in futility. Their behavior was too unpredictable, too spontaneous, and the barista was far too compelling. The final encounter of the day was the culmination of all preceding chaos. A playful challenge from the barista, disguised as a coffee-tasting game, forced prolonged proximity. She tried to maintain distance, but the movement of other patrons, combined with her own reflexive reactions, resulted in multiple accidental touches. Laughter erupted from around the cafe, and the alien, caught between duty and desire, could do nothing but continue the chaotic dance. Her internal systems flagged maximum protocol breach, extreme fascination, and peak embarrassment, yet externally she continued to participate in the unfolding comedy. Eventually, the rush ended, leaving her standing near the counter, notebook in hand, observing the barista who now seemed to understand the rhythm of her awkwardness and seemed entertained by it. She realized the absurd truth: humans were chaotic, magnetic, and irresistibly unpredictable. Protocol might exist in theory, but in practice, it was impossible to follow around humans, and certainly impossible to follow around one particular barista. A final sneeze erupted as she bent down to retrieve a fallen pen, propelling her into the barista's arms in one last comically disastrous hug. The human laughed, unbothered, while she froze, internally calculating every breach, every touch, every moment of comedic failure, realizing that her mission had become less about observation and more about surviving, and perhaps enjoying, the beautiful chaos of human interaction. Exiting the cafe, she reflected on the day's events. Her attempts at restraint had been spectacularly unsuccessful, yet each mishap had offered new insights, laughter, and a growing connection to the barista. Humans were unpredictable, absurd, and utterly charming, and she understood now that resisting fascination, or accidental touch, was a losing battle. Protocol might remain a guideline, but in the end she had discovered a fundamental truth: humans were worth the chaos, the embarrassment, and the hilarity that came with interacting with them, and one charming barista had proven to be entirely irresistible.